When we refer to natural law, what are we talking about? The first thing to say is that the term itself refers to different things. In its first instance, you're talking about the natural laws of the universe, nature's laws. Everybody understands that nature itself has inherent laws. Another context in which people will use that is if we're talking about the laws of human behavior, what we can understand about human nature. And in the third instance, it refers to human legal systems. Now, there's been a long history of thinkers who have thought, well, there are certain laws in nature, there's a certain order to nature, and that we should use this understanding of that as a basis for human legal systems and human cooperational systems. So nature's laws, human behavioral laws, I guess being a subset of nature's laws because we are part of nature, and thirdly, the idea that they influence human legal systems. So to give a couple of absurdly, almost silly examples, but just to really drive the point home, if we look at something like, okay, gravity exists as a natural law, pushing someone off a building will have negative consequences according to that natural law, and it's also going to have consequences according to human nature. The person that you've just pushed off a building, their family might retaliate against you. There'll be a whole host of negative consequences that will drive people away from profitable cooperation and into costly conflict. And so, as the third instance, we should use these understandings of nature's laws, their consequences, and the subsequent flow-on effect into human behavior. We should use those to influence our legal system. And you might make a law that says it's illegal to push people off buildings, just to be absurd about it. The same thing as well. You know, there are laws of nature that allow you to light fires. Lighting a fire under someone's house is going to have certain consequences. If you don't desire those consequences in your society, then that should show up in the legal system. So that's what we talk about. We talk about natural law. It is first descriptive. We use the understanding of the natural world and the laws of nature and human behavior that we can find out. And we use them to optimize our human systems, our human legal systems, our human systems of cooperation. So just to run through very quickly, what are some of the areas of scientific inquiry and social science that the Natural Law Institute will draw upon when formulating optimal systems for humans in the future? There's the idea of acquisitionism, that our brains are actually wired to acquire, and that most of what we say is an after-the-fact justification for that acquisition. A very interesting side story, as it was explained to me, is one of the huge problems with AI is, say if you make an AI robot and it looks out upon a landscape or something, the amount of information that it can intake in any one instance of looking at reality is infinite. You know, it might be like, well, what is the exact shade of coloring on those trees? What is the chemical composition of the sky? How dense is the concrete in the building I'm looking at? You know what I mean? There is potentially infinite data points to be looking at. But what humans do is, because we have a value-driven perception, because we're evolved to acquire. So we have evolved to filter things through what we value, to see what we value, for aiding the purpose of our survival, status acquisition, reproduction, etc. So we have this evolved ability to filter down all that information into what's important to us. But an AI that isn't an evolved organism, it's a created organism, it's just a computer, well, it wouldn't have that filter because it wasn't evolved. It didn't have a survival imperative generated through evolution. So human beings, we are evolved to acquire. What we say is usually an artifact justification for that, and that comes back to entropy being an inherent force. Like every other force and organism, we act to acquire resources as a store of energy for the purpose of outrunning entropy. And so we might talk about group evolutionary strategies is a strategy for acquisition, for survival and reproduction of each group. We can talk about moral foundations and how that differs between left-wing, right-wing and centrist. We also draw heavily on sex differences in cognitive bias. We often talk about the spectrum of cognitive brain biases that run from feminine, empathetic, hyperconsumptive, local, to masculine, typically masculine, systematic, capitalizing over time and at scale. With the definition of empathy being the ability to read the emotional state in another person and respond appropriately. So the ability to predict another's emotional responses. Whereas the definition of systematizing is the ability to deduce the underlying rules that govern a system and apply them or master them. And you can see this show up politically. There's a fair bit of overlap with these as typical left and right tendencies. The left-wing empathetic brains tend to see the world as individuals that they can empathize with, whereas the masculine systematic tends to break things down into systems for the purpose of capitalizing. What you'll see there is conservatives saying, well, what's the cost of this? They're doing trade-offs and things, whereas the left don't usually do trade-offs. They do moralizing, and they do, well, people need this, there's need, I'm responding to the emotional state of another person, and so forth. So the spectrum of cognitive biases shows up heavily in the work as well. There is work on societal trust and economics, that trust and cohesion is a precursor, a precondition to the generation of markets, which is then necessary for the generation of wealth, for that capitalizing. There's a lot of reference to status as the primary resource that humans are seeking to acquire, because status, social status in the hierarchy, is our access to more and better opportunities for productive cooperation, and therefore more opportunities for energy capture. So to tie this all together, the understanding that we generate is that cooperation is the most profitable method of interaction for people. And so what is the criteria we can use to define productive cooperation? Cooperation that maintains the incentive to cooperate productively and does not violate people's acquisition intuitions, therefore creating in them an incentive for retaliation or to break cooperation. And we define productive cooperation as reciprocity. Reciprocity, according to the following criteria, is a transaction voluntary, productive, warranted, fully informed, and free of externality on the demonstrated interests of others. Violation of these criteria violates people's acquisition intuitions and creates an incentive for them to break with cooperation or possibly even retaliate. Or in simple terms, it makes people unhappy and damages the cooperative wealth creation for everybody. And this reduction in wealth creation, this reduction in energy capture and discovery of opportunities for energy capture, for greater efficiencies and greater opportunities for the division of labor to once again enable larger captures of energy, is going to have the negative consequence, according to natural laws, of damaging our ability to outrun entropy. And we see this a lot in the modern world. The breakdown that you probably feel in society, if you're listening to this, is entropy catching up. We can see our societies, the structures that enable us to capture energy into the future breaking down. We can see entropy encroaching in upon us because we have violated the categories of productive cooperation. Therefore, to bring all this together, we talk about our understanding of science, of physics, biology, chemistry, the structures of the universe, stable relations. We talk about what we know about human nature, acquisitionism, moral intuitions, male-female sex bias differences, society, economics, trust, group evolutionary strategies, institutional strategies, ternary logic. Who developed first, the church, the aristocracy, or the market? In what order they developed, therefore giving an order of primacy as a group evolutionary strategy in each civilization. And so the idea is that we take all this information in, deduce it down to the first principles, so that we can encode optimal systems of human cooperation into our law, which is then going to give us the best chance for discovery of opportunities for capture of energy and therefore outrunning of entropy. This is the idea behind natural law.